Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Okay, so we're blessed today to have as our speaker Vinny Ferraro. Vinny has been a practitioner of insight meditation, vipassanā, since the mid-90s. He is a co-founder of the Dharma Punx, and he has been the guiding teacher of a Sangha in San Francisco for 15 years. He is also a nationally recognized leader in designing and implementing interventions for at-risk adolescents, and is a senior trainer for mindful schools. In 1987, he was introduced to service work and began leading groups for incarcerated populations. In 2001, he began teaching for Challenge Day, a nationally recognized social and emotional learning program, eventually becoming their director of training and leading workshops for over 110,000 youths on 4 continents. His website is vinnyferraro.org. That's VINNYFERRARO.org. Welcome, Vinny.
Thank you, Cass. I figured out a trick with this Zoom stuff. If you go to your picture and there's little 3 dots in the upper right-hand corner, you go to hide self-view. Sounds not very Buddhist, but I'd rather not look at myself. So here we are. Yeah. So hey, everyone. Thank you for having me. Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here with y'all. I was telling Cass it's been about 10 years since I visited this Sangha, so glad to be back. So I'll share a bit about how I've been working with practice, particularly at this time of this surreal time of COVID and lockdown. And wow, this is very Twilight Zone-y, you know, how everything could change in one moment. You know, you wake up and everything's different. And so how do we practice with that? So that's what I'd like to talk about this morning. And if if you get 1 or 2 things out of this, it may not be what I say. It may be just gathering like this because there's a value in that. You know, as we're all in our own little worlds, it's good to feel the connection. Somebody just checked in from Southeast Arizona. So I imagine the net that the Dharma is holding. How many people are meditating right now? And, almost 50 just on this call. So I like to expand out. And whenever I'm meditating for all beings. So that's my first intention. So I like to be able to make that explicit as we see so many faces on this call. And we're being held by the hands of the Dharma, and the Dharma is broad around the world and back. So I can't remember who said it, but I remember there being a quote that sounded something like, may you live in interesting times. Well, I guess we could check that off the list. We were all here when it all went sideways, the world. Because it's hard to believe with all the momentum of life and commerce that it could all stop in some way, right? And in these moments of what seems to be a heightened uncertainty, impermanence is not so abstract. And we talk about impermanence a lot in our practice. But But here it is, like in a very real, palpable way. And I can hear the Buddha's instructions about not really, he warned us against building castles out of sand. And he advised us to develop our inner resources as a refuge because conditions are unreliable. So it certainly has our attention. And a lot like retreat, a lot of our comforts and desires, how I'd like to move around the world, and they're kind of gone, some of the distractions. And we're getting clearer on what actually matters, what's essential. Right? So whatever way conditions are not ideal, that's where we practice. Right? So in a way, we've been training for this. And with that in mind, I want to explore some of the tools of our trade. Because this can be really difficult. In fear, it's such an incompetent teacher. So whenever we're under the influence, and that's how I like to think about the hindrances or the defilements, fear, doubt, sloth and torpor, greed, anger, right? These are all things that we could be under the influence of. Whenever we're under the influence, we don't have access to our best thinking. So in a way, the Dharma for me is like, how do I not make things worse? Right? Many of us are familiar with the sutta around the second arrow, that conditions, sometimes they can hurt. And so there's that first arrow that lands in us. And then sometimes the way we respond to it is so unskillful. It's like a second, third, and fourth arrow. So how do we, what is an appropriate response to the challenges that we're facing right now? And I'm going to reach back 1,800 years ago to Nagarjuna, who said, without the discipline of the mind, what good are any other of the disciplines? Basically, it's the software that runs the hardware. So we have to pay particular attention to what we're paying attention to. This is a whole bunch of moments that my mind is not offering up anything helpful. Maybe you have that experience. And it's like, okay, what do we do now? Cool. Can you feel your feet on the floor? Can I redirect my awareness to somewhere that's maybe more worthwhile? Because if we just stay in the dimension of thought, it's like a dog chasing its tail. It's trying to figure it out. It's trying rumination or papancha, proliferation of mind that just wants to figure out how to get out of suffering. I mean, that's what I want the Dharma to be. I want the Dharma to be a get out of suffering free card. It's like, look, I'm suffering through all these sits so I don't have to suffer every day, right? Ideally, I want it to be that, and it's not. So I'm usually looking for what is a worthy place for my attention? What can I learn from this moment and all that it brings? So part of the practice, the first foundation of going into our bodies first, right? There's a certain kind of relief that comes with it. It's like, oh my God, I don't have to spin as fast as the mind. I don't have to try to keep up with that dog race. Cool. So there's a kind of a permission. Oh, you can ignore the mind. Get into your body. Okay. What I love about the Dharma is we always have a choice on how we're going to do this moment. that's a freedom, I would say. And I have found kindness, because I didn't grow up with kindness being a leading value. So every place in my experience that I want to muscle up on, be like, all right, enough already. It's like, can I soften? Every place I want to muscle up. Because muscling up, that would have worked. That acorn would have sprouted if it was going to, right? So we have to put down the stick in a certain way. And that's why judgment's not so valuable in our practice. Because we could just totally ride ourselves for not sitting enough, not getting it. I should be further along. It's like, hold on. When people come to me and they say, well, they're at the beginning of the path and they're like, well, what can I expect from the practice? It's like, I hope you get nothing. That would be killer. If there was one place in your life that you could actually put some work in and not be in that acquisition mind, it's like, there's a lot to be learned from just having some space. Not more, not better, not different. Just rest and kind awareness. And that would be of great benefit to your nervous system, to your heart, to your own resilience. So we try to, kindness is a real currency, I would say, for me, internally and externally. I remember a couple of lifetimes ago, I used to go to Burning Man a lot. I went for like 10 years. I had a big tea temple. We would just try to hydrate people that were dehydrated in the middle of a desert. And I would hear folks talk about it. And, whether they had a life-changing experience or they just felt like it was a bunch of yahoos doing drugs. What I knew is that they were telling me more about themselves than the event. Right? They were telling me how they saw what was happening. With this pandemic, we also see what frame of mind are folks in as they see, as we move through the world. So Paul Williams writes, when you go out and see the empty streets, the empty stadiums, the empty train platforms, don't say that this looks like the end of the world. Rather, what you're seeing is love in action. In that negative space, it's how much we care for each other, for our grandparents, for our compromised brothers and sisters, for people we will never meet. So, yeah, people will lose jobs over this. Some people will lose their businesses. Some will lose their lives. All the more reason to take a moment when you're out on your walk or on your way to a shop or just watching the news to look into the emptiness and marvel at all that love. Let it fill you and sustain you. This isn't the end of the world. It's the most remarkable act of global solidarity we may ever witness in our lifetimes. I like that. I like it because, again, it gives me a choice of how I want to do this moment. I was reading this professor of infectious disease, and he was talking about, he's like, look, what's the main danger? The main danger is not acting soon enough. So he's like, I wear a mask. He's like, the reason I do is I just think about it like I already have it. I don't have it, but I imagine that I do, so I don't want to infect anyone else. He goes, then it gets to be a great gift that I'm giving to every being I come into contact with. Instead of the fear of like, I hope I don't get it. Oh, maybe that person has it. He's like, that fear really has a daunting effect on our immune system. We don't want to be locked in that fear state. So if we can turn it into a gift a way to care for each other, then it gets to be beautiful. And I'm very interested in the alchemy of turning things that are difficult into something beautiful. I mean, that's what we're trying to do with these lives, right? You've been given this life and it's like, cool, make something beautiful out of it. Take all the shit that you've been through and try to make something beautiful. It's like, cool. I like that practice. So that's how I've been holding this the last couple months. Because as we know, there's not one truth in any given moment, right? There's the multiplicity of truths. So how are we experiencing this moment is largely subject to what we're under the influence of. So if we're mired in uncertainty and doubt, or is there self-pity, or if there's anger, we're not seeing clearly. We're under the influence. So we have to remember that I have to acknowledge that I'm not seeing the whole picture when I'm under the influence. And that's one of the reasons the Sangha is so important, the community. Because when I'm bugging out, one of my friends could be like, yo, maybe pump the brakes, you know what I mean? And take another look. And so I do a gratitude practice a lot because it gets me back in touch with the context of my life. So much of our experience is constructed by our hopes and fears. I mean, it's quite an illusion. I look back on my life and, you know, there's been a lot of difficulty. You know, there was drug addiction and homelessness and incarceration and a lot of violence and trauma. But I would say the hardest thing about my life was my thoughts about it. Yeah. I grew up on the East Coast and there's a certain kind of attitude in my family, in my neighborhood, and, you know, just kind of survival, you know? I'm hanging in there, you know, doggy paddling, you know? What I never really understood was the power of belief. I mean, it's quite unmitigated. You think it sucks? Wish granted. It just sucks now, right? Like if you think, oh, this is kind of, you know, there's 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows, that gets to be true. So we have to really watch the attitudes of mind because we don't have the bandwidth that we normally have. Because I don't know about y'all, but I don't have all the release valves that I'm used to having at my disposal. I can't just go hang out with my friends and kind of remember, oh, that's right, I was kind of taking myself too seriously. I don't have like all the ways that I'm used to reconnecting. So in a way, this time is like martial law. It's like, look, you don't have the bandwidth you usually have. So really maybe pay special attention to what you're paying attention to. What are you putting in? Am I on a diet of an hour a day of news? That has an effect on our nervous system. Is that the wisest way to spend time? I don't know. Maybe 15 minutes is sufficient. It's like most things. A little bit is okay, but it has diminished returns. So we have to take a special care to what we're paying attention to. And there's so many, you know, we live in a world that's not just. And the unfairness is at an all-time high at a time, you know, at a time like this. We see the disparity between race, between, you know, all the different subsets of folks that are being touched by this. So I think like having a time every day that I get to rest in a radical acceptance of what is, even if it's a half hour, really allows me to bring my best forth. And the great Advaita Vedanta teacher Nisargadatta Maharaj, she said, to know that you're a prisoner of your own mind and that you live in an imaginary world of your own creation is the dawn of wisdom. And I find that mostly true. Right? You wake up and you realize that you're locked up. You're locked up by your own thoughts, your own experiences, your own limiting ideas. What I like about it is that there's a tremendous power in choosing our narrative. Right? Viktor Frankl said, the moment suffering finds meaning, it ceases to be suffering. And so in my better moments, the question that arises in my heart of heart is, how can this be in the service of awakening? This moment. And through this pandemic, I see how much I took for granted. I took a lot of it for granted. I took, gatherings. I've been doing groups for a long time. I just, it's cool. But I was never really grateful for it. People can be kind of annoying. Now I'm just like, man, I miss y'all. Right? And I've practiced a long time with anxiety. That was a big part of my life. And so at a time like this, it's a stressful time, How do we not go to war or judge ourselves for how we're doing it? Just because anxiety arises or stress arises, I'd actually be more worried if stress and anxiety wasn't arising, right? Like you'd be pretty deluded. This is a stressful time. Kabir, the great Persian poet, said, wherever you are is the entry point. The ground that we're standing on is the entry point. Always. And it's our suffering that wakes us up. We run from it, But how do we change our relationship to it? I have a practice. I use slogans a lot. They really resonate with me, and that's how I've always practiced with slogans. Right now it's like this is one of the slogans that my teacher gave me. Good enough is another slogan I use a lot. Am I good enough dad? Am I a good enough teacher? Am I a good enough friend? Because I got a perfectionism, that kind of aversive personality, always looking for what's wrong, So good enough is another one. Another one is I see you, Mara. So Mara being the more negative aspects of my experience. So the defilements, greed, hatred, and delusion, even the hindrances, anxiety and stress, like I was saying. When I came to practice, I saw, even after a couple of years, how personally I take these things. I hold it against myself that I am the way I am. But we come by it all so honestly. I was trying to get my needs met as a kid and ended up with some, bad coping mechanisms, right? They may have served me to protect me as a kid growing up in a violent house. But as the Buddha said, if you cross the river in a boat, do you drag the boat with you on dry land? No. So sometimes we got to let go of some of those patterns and habits. But the first part of it is to not take them personally. It's not a conclusion on my practice or who I am I'm not the origin story of anxiety in this realm. I didn't give birth to it. It passes through a lot of people. Okay, cool. when I could stop taking it all so personally, or some conclusion about me or my essential self, it becomes a lot more workable. It's like, oh, I can endure the sensations. I just can't endure the stories. That's my fault that you're always going to be like this. You always felt like this. I don't know what your problem is. It's like not very generous. Yeah. And I don't have the bandwidth I usually have to pay attention to ignorant people. Like, that is on tap right now. There's a lot of people out there that I just don't understand. But it's a question of resources. How much of my time am I spending focusing on that? Yeah. So when I find myself tight, contracted, and suffering, it's like, what am I suffering over? And is it worth it? What do I have influence over? And as I said earlier, it's about redirecting my attention. Oh, maybe mind's not offering up anything helpful. Check out the heart. Okay. Heart feels okay. Check out the body. There's all these dimensions that we can really focus our attention on and redirecting awareness. I think that's a superpower, at least for me, having struggled with anxiety a lot. It's like I would just try to hate it out of existence, just push it away. No, I'm not feeling that. No. But that didn't work. So now I take a much broader view. Like, how big is the space that's experiencing it? And usually I just feel it in my belly or in my chest, sometimes around my neck, contraction, tightness, fluttery. But my feet are hardly ever bothered. So you titrate your awareness and like, oh, my feet are fine right now. Okay, well, locate your awareness there. Feel the fundamental okayness. Are you okay? I actually am. Like I said, we can usually bear the sensations, but the endless stories that we get caught up in, they are endless. They're just like an echo chamber. So if you find yourself caught in that loop, redirect your awareness to somewhere that feels more nourishing. In this habit that we're in of letting go, right? That's the practice. Okay, what do I have to let go of in order to be free? Most of what feels unbearable is the future tripping. Like, oh my God, well, what's going to happen next month? And how long? And then how are we going to come back? And it's just sitting with uncertainty. I don't like to not know. Not knowing in my house was very dangerous. So you had to know. Was my father carrying a paper bag in when he came in? Because I know there would be a bottle of alcohol and he would be louder and more violent. So you're tracking. Do I hear the crinkle of a bag, right? You're just noticing these very, very sharp awareness. So we let go. Let's say, we just did a 30-minute practice period. Probably let go over 100 times. So are you in the practice of letting go? Because it turns out that is a very valuable practice. When I'm taking myself seriously, I'm mad that my partner said some shit to me, and it's just like, oh, are you in the habit of letting go? Because if you're not, you're going to suffer a lot longer. So, a lot of people don't feel nourished by practice. They take it so personally. They're trying so hard to be good at this. So I'll sit with them and I'll ask them to explain what happens. So, awareness just won't stay. Every time I practice, I just can't get even 5 breaths in a row. Okay. Why is that a problem? well, I think I should, after, this many years of practice, I think I should be progressing more. So that's the story that's sponsoring the suffering. How about if you just put your awareness on the part of you that wakes up out of the dream, right? Because that's happening a whole bunch of times, right? Every time you sit, awareness wanders, and you're like, oh, that's right, I was meditating, and you come back. That moment, that's what we're practicing. It's not me that's leaving. I'm not making some decision. It's taking our thoughts very personally, where I try to not experience them that way. It's like, look, I'm not producing these thoughts and watching them. I'm more identified with the seeing than what's being seen. And in that way, practice feels hella nourishing. It's like, wow, look at how many times I let go. And every time I let go, every time I woke up, that moment of wakefulness or mindfulness, I tasted freedom. It's like, wow, I don't remember leaving, but I remember coming back. And if we focus on that part of the equation, practice can be very nourishing. Yeah. And I try to connect with the part of me that is not struggling. And I keep coming back to this fundamental okayness that's right here, right now. The folks at the Greater Good Science Lab, they put up a bunch of lists to focus on during the lockdown. Move your bodies, be creative. But the last one on the list caught my attention. And it was, what expectation of normal did you let go of today? So hundreds of times in one practice, letting go, touching peace. I'm lucky. I live in the country now. I live in the mountains. So I can connect with a boundless awareness right outside my door as I look at the sky. And I try to not fill up the space. I have a little bit of space here and there, and try to not fill it up, and try to really understand what nourishes me. It's not an hour on Facebook. It's not Netflix. I still do those things because I think there's a value into being taken into another story. So I don't judge those things. I don't have a hard line that I just don't do them. But I don't fool myself into thinking that they're nourishing. So we have to find what nourishes us. Oh, a walk in nature. Oh, cool. Music. It could be cooking. Some healthy food. Beautiful. Connecting with someone. As odd as this Zoom platform is, I find it oddly satisfying. It's like I feel like I can't remember what my friends look like or their laugh or their smile. And then we do this and I'm like, oh, that's right. I love you, man. I remember you, So I am in an exploration of finding what is nourishing for me. Because I need things that are nourishing right now. And I consciously do my best to orient toward gratitude. Because that gets to be a part of this truth too, along with everything else that my mind is ready to go toward. In the midst of all of it, I have a lot to be grateful for. A lot. Yeah. Yeah. And if you have some energy, right? How are we being in service to this world? If I'm done tripping on I, me, and mine, and how I'm going to get through this, is there some space? As Ryokan said, if only my monk's robes were wide enough to gather up all the suffering people in this floating world. There's so many beautiful acts of courage and generosity right now. I really wonder, how can we keep it going? When this thing ends, how do we keep remembering how much we impact each other? The anthropologist Margaret Mead was asked by a student what she considered to be the first sign of civilization in a culture. And the student expected Mead to talk about fish hooks or clay pots or grinding stones. But Mead said that the first sign of civilization in ancient culture was a femur, the thigh bone, that had been broken and then healed. And she explained that in the animal kingdom, if you break your leg, you die. You can't run from danger. You can't get to the river for a drink. You can't hunt for food. You are meat for prowling beasts. So no animal survives a broken leg long enough for the bone to heal. But the broken femur bone that has healed is evidence that someone has taken the time to stay with the one who fell. They bound up the wound and has carried that person to safety and has tended that person through recovery. So helping someone else through difficulty is where civilization starts. Yeah. So what are we doing to get outside of our own self-absorption? How many ways am I being generous with this time? What do I have to offer? Because I feel like we all have something to offer. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe there'll be a few minutes for questions. Anything you want to check in about? Anything I said that you want to ask into, or any questions about the instructions? Yeah, I'd love to hear from you. Cass, can you make that happen? You got to unmute yourself, brother. I got you. There you go.
There we go. Okay, thank you. Yeah, wonderful talk. Thank you so much. And we invite questions from others. I had a question about, I was wondering if, you've offered a tremendous amount of advice about dealing with our situation, which you refer to as kind of martial law. I love that description. In your work with incarcerated people, do you feel any of that work informed when you found yourself in this situation in martial law? I mean, I know it's a stretch, but is there anything in your work with people who are incarcerated that you felt informed your approach to the current situation?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I know about the incarceration of my own mind. I know about the incarceration of my own heart, right? Like, when I go in there, I try to talk about freedom, not as an abstract, but how free are we, right? Was I free when I was 110 pounds living in a crack house? No. Was I free at my mom's wake when my father walked in shackled from the prison with the prison guards? No. So if we're not always free on the outside, are we always locked up on the inside, right? So we start questioning, how free are you in any given moment? They've taught me a lot about freedom. about gratitude, which I touched on today. I've been blown away by the courage. And now I'm spending a lot more time training the sheriffs and the corrections officers. And, they're supposedly free, but they live in that system. So it's quite something to be able to walk through the worlds, right? We walk through San Francisco, we walk through a prison, we walk through a dilapidated neighborhood, and everybody's living within these different conditions. And the conditions, if they provided suffering or, freedom, if they, were just happy, then all you would have to do is get the conditions right. But the people that I know that are millionaires, they have everything they could want, but they're not happy, right? So there's something about like letting go of thinking that it's the conditions. Because ultimately, I wasn't ecstatic before the coronavirus hit, right? I wasn't just ecstatic. I probably won't be after this. The Buddhist said, basically paraphrasing, it's always something. It's always something. It's always something. It's incapable of delivering lasting satisfaction conditions. So when we can let that go, that's an incredible freedom. It's like, if it's always something, then I don't have to get so bent on it being, once this is over, then it's going to be great. It's like, no, it's just going to be something else. You're going to be suffering about something else. So you don't have to put all your stock in, when my son turns 5 and he goes to school, then it's going to be on. It's just like that destination just keeps moving. So when we can take that, and I see it in the guys, right? They talk about the day I get out of prison. I'm like, well, what are you doing now that's going to make that a reality in terms of being ready for that magical moment? It's like hearing people talk about Santa Claus, it's always been, for me, it was like once I get a car or once I get married. And then, soon enough, it was like once I get divorced. It's like, oh my God, dude, it's always something. It just keeps moving. So, we've played that game long enough. And whenever we think some other moment is going to hold what this one doesn't, we're involved in a shell game. We're running games.
When sheltering is over.
Yeah. Then it's going to be so on. What?
Yeah, right.
It's just bullshit. Right. It's okay to admit that's right. I'm just stuck in a pattern that thinks it's the conditions over and over and over. I'm looking for something to blame, and so we take an ultimate responsibility. Yeah. Thanks, Cass.
Sure. I think we have time for one, maybe two more questions.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe one more, because I'd like to end with a poem.
Okay.
Thank you, Vinny, for a lovely talk, really, for sharing your heart with us. I thought you said so much that I related to, and we must read the same books or something. The last one I thought of was Bo Lozov's We're All Doing Time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. We are all doing time.
That's great.
What do you do? This is such a simple question, but what's your favorite go-to for remembering that? What your teacher taught you, and just remembering.
Yeah, like I said, I use slogans. I like to use slogans because they're simple. They're simple and pithy, right?
Yes.
So the default mode of the mind can hold any, short, punchy thing. So, many, many times a day, I rest in, right now it's like this, right? These short little things that are like, okay, can I make room for this experience without making it worse? Because that, life's hard enough. So in any way, am I making this harder than it needs to be by the way I'm orienting to it? And most of the time I could find a way that I'm making it harder, either by ruminating on it, or thinking negatively about it, or thinking that it's just one way, or this is the problem. Whenever I get absolute, right? When there's not enough flexibility of mind, then I can feel the tightness and that contraction. So I would say, find the slogans that really speak to that openness, that flexibility of mind for you. What is it for you that is a reminder? And, I've covered my whole body with images of reminders, right?
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, could have posters everywhere, and collect slogans, but maybe something like Lojong or something, or
Yeah, that's right.
A few.
Yeah, and hopefully, my house is covered in reminders. My world is inhabited by, the people I love. Remind me too to come into practice. So that's we can get it anywhere we look if we have the right eyes. Right? I live in the forest. I live in the mountains, and this is such a display of life and death. Just what a display every day, life and death. Wow. Yeah. Thanks for the question. So I'd like to end with a little reading from what's his name? Matthew Horrocks, which is he's a German futurist. So he was writing, let's see what he wrote. Let me see if I can bring it up. Okay. So he wrote, after a period of bewilderment and fear, an inner strength arises. The world ends, but with the experience that we're still here. A kind of new being arises from inside us. Because in the middle of civilization's shutdown, we run through forests or parks or across almost empty spaces. This is not an apocalypse. This is but a new beginning. This is how it turns out. Change begins as a changed pattern of expectations, perceptions, and world connections. And sometimes it's precisely the break with routines, the familiar, that releases our sense of the future again. The idea and certainty that everything could be completely different and maybe even better. So every deep crisis leaves a story, a narrative that points far into the future. And one of the strongest images left by the coronavirus are of the Italians making music on their balconies. The second image was sent to us by satellite images that suddenly showed the industrial areas of China and Italy free of smog. Mm-hmm. So in 2020, human CO2 emissions will drop for the first time. That very fact will do something to us. And if the virus can do that, then possibly we can do that. Mm-hmm. So maybe the virus is just a messenger from the future. The drastic message is human civilization has become too dense, too fast, and overheated. It's racing too fast in a direction in which there is no future. But it can reinvent itself. System reset, cool down, music on the balconies. This is how the future works. Yeah, I like that. So it's a tradition, at least in my practice, that we dedicate the merit. Do y'all do that, Kaz?
We do that. We have some announcements, and then as soon as the announcements are over, we'll do a dedication of merit. And if you'd like to do that, you're welcome to do that. Are there any announcements? I could say next week we have Dr. Charles Garfield will be our Dharma speaker. He was the founder of the Shanti Project. So a different era, a different pandemic or epidemic. I'd also invite you to go to the gaybuddhist.org website, to the donations page, and do that right after our sitting today, if possible, so that it's fresh in your mind. And a recommended donation of $10 to $20 would help the group meet its continuing expenses. We're continuing to pay at least partial rent on the our rent of the center. We still have a newsletter coming out. We still we don't have the Market Street dinners right now, but they'll be returning. So, and our own Dana for speakers and other places that we express gratitude. So and we also meet on Wednesday night. Is it 7:30?
7:30.
7:30. We have another Zoom meeting. It's the same login as these meetings. So consider joining us on Wednesday. It's
basically the same format without the Dharma talk. We have a half an hour sit from 7:30 to 8, and then from 8 to 9, discussion of sorts. Sometimes we even read poetry or share art pieces or just have a group check-in. But come as you are, and we'd love to see you. Thank you.
Any other announcements, please?
Yes. Hi.
Yeah.
Just a note about the newsletter. Because of the logistics and safety concerns, we will not be mailing out paper copies. Normally we do about 300, over 300, about 2/3 of which go to prisoners all over the country. So not this time, but it will be posted. It should be posted next week, next Sunday on the website. So I encourage everybody to check it out there.
Okay, and after so we won't have a mailing party today? Is that what you're...
Next week, we will not. No.
Okay. But we invite you to stay, and we'll keep the room open until 12:30 if people want to experience community for a little while longer. And if there's no other announcements, then I'll turn it back to Vinny, and please proceed with a dedication of merit.
Beautiful. Thank you, Cass. And as Cass said, if you're interested in finding out what I'm doing, vinnyferraro.org or Big Heart City. That's the San Francisco Sangha that I lead. And we meet on Friday nights. Okay. So, any benefit that came from us sitting together, sharing and practicing, let us dedicate it to all beings in all directions, particularly beings that are struggling right now, feel like no one is pulling for them. Let's hold them in our hearts. May all beings be well. May all beings feel safe. And may all beings know liberation.
Thank you so much, Vinny, and everyone.
Yeah,
be
take
safe,
good care, y'all.
be healthy.
We'll be in touch.
See you in another dream.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Vinny. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Cass. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.